So, MEP Martina, I want to thank you for joining us here at the Hague Summit for International Human Rights and for your excellent speech. I would just like to take this opportunity to ask you a few questions. And your speech concerned itself with international law and human rights, especially focused on state injustices in the north of Ireland and Palestine. What recommendations would you give for strengthening the capacity for international law to encourage the adoption and promotion of universal human rights?
Well, I think it's very clear when you have states that sign up to the European Convention of Human Rights, what we need is the full implementation of those rights. And the examples that I give, for instance, during my address was on Article 2, the right to life. And when you have a European Court of Human Rights finding, in this case, the British government having breached Article 2 of the European Court of the European Convention of Human Rights, then what we need is the full implementation of that, and I think that's what you would increase its capacity and build confidence that it is an effective remedy and an effective tool. But what we do have at the moment is, even when the European Court of Human Rights in the state of Britain and elsewhere finds that they have breached and they put packages of measures together to remedy such breaches, you find that the obstruction of those agencies or those institutions who do not want such rights fully recognised come into play, and therefore you start having the justice delayed is justice denied, and once again you have the repeat of the non-implementation, despite the fact you have states signing up for them. So what you do need is a serious engagement and discussion at state level with all of those states who have signed up to the European Convention of Human Rights, which means that those states who have been involved in breaches of those rights must remedy those, and they must remedy. There should be a time frame within that remedy, as opposed to something that can allow, in the experience we've had in the north, and it is other experiences in other states, that time frame allows just the delay to continue.
I would like to thank you again for being here with us at this summit. Do you see human rights as a predominantly cultural issue? And how do you think that we can find a balance between universal international human rights law and the respect for individual cultures?
Well, I think human rights, by their very nature of what they are designed to do, you will always have competing rights, even within the framework of human rights themselves. And what they can do, I think, is enhance the cultural diversity that we require. Obviously, there needs to be respect for individual cultures, and I would be someone who would very much be advocating that cultures are respected in that way, but there are absolute rights and protections that are there for a reason. I was very interested when I listened to one of the previous speakers talk about, when I heard about the discussion that is currently taking place, in that, for instance, rape could be viewed, and actually there is a good general exchange of views as to whether that would be a breach of the Geneva Convention, which I actually believe that it is. So when you look at the protections that are there, and then the different cultural experiences that one has depending on where one country is, or what religion or faith or none that one is born into, then you can, yes, appreciate all of that, but it has to be that within all of those cultures, that international rights and humanitarian law has to have their place, and that place is that individuals has got protection as a consequence to the European Convention of Human Rights.
Thank you.
Now, moving on, we're from the Institute for Cultural Diplomacy. How would you define cultural diplomacy? And in keeping with the theme of the day, do you think cultural diplomacy can affect human rights in any way, or they can really work together?
Again, I think that there are sort of competing issues at play. When you think about cultural diplomacy, I think as itself, I think it has a role to play in ensuring that areas, countries, nations, and people who have different cultures can understand and have a good appreciation of the other, as opposed to what we had for years was the West and the rest, and the other was always viewed as something inferior. I think that cultural diplomacy has a role to play in potentially bringing about equality among cultures, in that people can learn to respect each other's difference and share each other's culture. Like one of the areas that I spoke about, for instance, was Palestine. And earlier this year I visited Palestine, and I was in the holy city of Jerusalem, and there you can see Christians and Jews and Muslims sharing that beautiful space together. And that is what the Palestinians want to advocate, that it does not belong to any one sector or other, it belongs to us all as people, and those of no faith as well. And I think that's where cultural diplomacy can play a part in encouraging the sharing of experiences. And I think it's very valuable, but therein lies its challenge, because it comes up against, for instance, some states who want their culture to be the dominant culture, and it goes back to the us and them always wanting there to be another which is inferior. And I think that's what cultural diplomacy brings, is a challenge to that view that human beings are born equal.
You were talking about like your experience in Palestine like early this year, and like how the state can play this role with cultural diplomacy as a tool for bringing people together. How do you see like the actual role of the state, like the involvement of the state with cultural diplomacy in practice? Like, what could it be?
Well, I think the role of the state is to encourage differences and respect for each other. Like, for instance, in the north of Ireland, and I have found among MEPs that there is not that recognition of sectarianism as a concept. They understand racism, but sectarianism, as we have experienced it, where one tradition has ruled another, one tradition, in my experience, in my life experience of growing up, where one tradition coming out of the invasion and then colonisation and what happened to the partition of Ireland, and then a very small part of Ireland being allowed to be ruled by one state, because the state at that stage, the British state, had encouraged a garrison, as we know from Kitson and what has happened in colonies all over the world, is that they had a garrison there protecting their own interests, and there always had to be another. And the same thing I think you can see in Palestine. And when you have a state wanting to have that protection of itself, then you're not going to get the respect and the intermingling of each other. Like, my father was a Protestant, my mother was a Catholic, and therefore I do believe there's not a sectarian bone in my body. Thankfully, that was the family that I was born into. However, when families or children are born into families where, for instance, the other, whether in my personal experience in the north of Ireland, whether it's Catholic or Protestant, and they are being taught that they are inferior, or for instance in Palestine, where you have Israelis believing that the Jewish people are the superior people, and that the Palestinian people and Muslim people are inferior. I think there you can see that the role of the state in enabling and encouraging such mindsets, and that is very dangerous. So the state, when the state has got confidence in itself, and it doesn't need a garrison, it doesn't need another inferior sector in their society in order to make them feel superior, then I think the whole issue of equality for all and rights for all and the embracing of human rights for all in international law, but unfortunately what we have at this moment in time is that there's an international community of people who are observing and who are uncomfortable and who are debating and discussing the double standards that are taking place, and that's what I talked about in my speech. When you have states who are able to be involved and have been involved and are involved in state terrorism, And then you have Netanyahu go to Paris and stand shoulder to shoulder with other leaders, as if he has no place to answer for. There are many people who believe that he shouldn't have been standing in Paris, he should have been standing in front of a court.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It's been very interesting.
Thank you.
Thank you.